The U.S. Treasury market is starting to crack under the weight of the national debt, with yields pushing past 5%. When we talk about how we accumulated this much debt, we typically point to the trillions spent fighting 2-decade-long overseas wars. Or we blame legislation that allowed a handful of billionaires to dodge their fair share of taxes. But the data suggests a different primary beneficiary. The real engine of the national debt may actually be the American upper middle class. In 2001, the Congressional Budget Office projected that the United States would essentially pay off its entire publicly held debt within a decade. Politicians looked at that projected surplus and treated it as a giveaway. They authorized new domestic programs, defense spending, and broad tax cuts, entirely skipping the part where they hand voters the bill. To pull that off, Washington normalized a specific mathematical maneuver. They substituted taxation with borrowing. Taxing $10,000 from a wealthy household permanently extinguishes that wealth. Borrowing it instead means the household keeps the cash, and the government takes on a liability. Consequently, the government pays them steady interest over decades on money it could have simply taxed away. Rather than taxing the affluent to fund operations, we engineered a system that pays them to provide the capital. It is easy to assume this is a game played exclusively by the top 1%, but the math points to a much wider group. The top 10% of Americans hold nearly 90% of all corporate equities and mutual funds in the country. This is the creditor affluent class. They are professionals with significant home equity, 7-figure 401ks, and robust pensions like those held by public school teachers and police officers. These households don't view themselves as financial rentiers. They are citizens who worked hard, saved responsibly, and prepared for retirement. But focusing only on billionaires hides a critical political reality. An enormous voting majority bloc of the country now relies on returns to capital, rather than just their wages, for their lifetime security. The federal government supports this group through tax expenditures, policies that allowed private retirement wealth to grow without being taxed annually. These retirement tax incentives are expansive, costing the Treasury nearly $200 billion a year in foregone revenue. Because you can only defer taxes on income you can afford not to spend, the majority of this subsidy flows to the highest earners. The cycle begins when affluent households keep their money, letting it grow tax-free in private accounts. Because the government collected less revenue, the Treasury has to borrow from the financial markets to fund basic operations. The government then pays interest on that debt, which flows right back into the mutual funds and pension systems owned by those same households. Government debt acts as a subsidized engine for building private wealth. This feedback loop has created an asset-mediated welfare state. For the bottom half of the country, the system is straightforward. You rely on labor, pay wage taxes, and use highly visible social safety nets. Above that line, the state supports the top 10% through tax breaks, asset compounding, and debt interest. This creates a political trap. This affluent coalition demands well-funded public services while resisting taxes on their accumulated assets, which they view as an earned right. Politicians solve this contradiction by using debt to deliver spending without raising taxes, keeping a highly influential voter base happy. These benefits are politically indestructible because they remain invisible to the public eye. This arrangement functioned for 2 decades because interest rates sat near zero. Today, those rates have repriced. The U.S. savings bonds and Treasury securities financing this system now yield over 5%. At 5% interest, the cost to service the debt explodes. The government owes tens of billions in additional dollars annually without passing a single new program. The 40-year era of costless deficits has ended. The national debt represents the physical invoice for a system that diverted the public ledger to the creditor class for decades.